Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today, we're doing something really fascinating. We're going to demystify the complex, sometimes messy rules that govern our entire planet. We'll start by breaking down the absolute fundamentals of international law, and then, and this is the cool part, we're going to put those exact concepts to a massive stress test against one of the most urgent crises we are facing today. All right, let's just dive right into it.
So, I want to start off with a really fundamental question. Have you ever actually stopped to wonder, who sets the rules for the world? I mean, think about it. There is no supreme boss of Earth. There's no world government. And there certainly isn't a global police force flying around forcing countries to behave. The entire system that keeps the world running is actually based on an incredibly delicate concept, a contract between sovereign states. It literally relies 100% on the autonomous will of nations to just cooperate and limit their own power. Kind of wild, right?
Okay, so here's our roadmap for today. First, international law basics. Second, we'll look at the UN Charter. Third, we'll trace the evolution of human rights. And fourth, we'll tackle the global challenge of climate migration. Let's get going.
Section 1. International Law Basics. Let's establish the playing field. Before we really get into the weeds, we need to clear up one essential distinction, because there is a massive difference between public and private international law. Private law is what kicks in when, say, an American company has a contract dispute with a Japanese company. It's corporate, it's private. But for this explainer, we are completely ignoring all of that. We are focusing exclusively on public international law. We're talking diplomatic relations between sovereign states, major global treaties, and human rights. This is the stuff that decides how the entire planet is governed.
Think of our global architecture like a building project that started way back in the 17th century with the Peace of Westphalia. That's when we got the concept of absolute state sovereignty. Essentially, the rule was, inside my borders, I call the shots, and you stay out. And that system held up for centuries. But then, fast forward to 1945. Out of the literal ashes of World War II, the UN Charter is born, creating a much more interconnected system. And that brings us to the modern era, where the focus has heavily shifted from just protecting national borders to protecting human rights and managing shared global challenges.
But wait, if there's no global parliament, how do these rules actually get made? Well, there are three main sources. First up is custom, basically repeated behaviors over time that states eventually just accept as legally binding. Second, we have written treaties, which are essentially giant multilateral contracts. And third, this one's fascinating, a concept called ius cogens. These are absolute, non-derogatable rules. Think of things like the absolute prohibition of torture or unprovoked aggression. No state, under any circumstances, can ever opt out of these supreme norms.
And here is where it all comes together. The absolute crucial point of this entire ecosystem is captured in a famous Latin phrase, pacta sunt servanda. It means agreements must be kept. Remember how I said there's no world police force ready to swoop in militarily for every broken rule? Because of that, this entire international system is basically an honor system. It relies heavily on good faith. It is quite literally the invisible glue holding the world order together. States generally obey the rules because they know if this pact of mutual trust breaks down, global stability goes down right along with it.
Moving on to Section 2, the UN Charter. Let's look at the actual institutions and rules.
1945. This was truly year zero for the current world order. Picture this. 51 original member nations gathered in San Francisco to sign the United Nations Charter. It was this historic, incredibly ambitious, and totally unprecedented attempt to permanently outlaw war. From that exact moment on, the use of armed force was officially banned globally, except in very strict cases of self-defense, or when expressly authorized by the UN to maintain peace.
Now, to make an ambition that massive actually work, the Charter had to build a structured machine. So you've got the General Assembly. Think of that as a massive global town square where every state gets a voice. Then there's the incredibly powerful Security Council, which holds the primary responsibility for maintaining world peace. And of course, the International Court of Justice, which is there to legally resolve disputes between nations. It's a hugely complex apparatus, but it serves as the diplomatic engine for the entire world.
Let's take a quick reality check here, though. On paper, Article 2 of the UN Charter establishes the absolute sovereign equality of all its members. Everyone is equal. But history and political reality show us a much harsher truth, which is basically the law of the strongest. International law doesn't just float in a perfect vacuum, right? It is constantly shaped, bent, and influenced by major military and economic powers. There is this ongoing unresolved tension between the beautiful theory of legal equality and hard, gritty geopolitical reality.
All right, Section 3, the evolution of human rights. This is where things shift to protecting individuals.
So what's really interesting is this almost silent but incredibly powerful revolution that happened right after 1945. You see, up until World War II, international law only cared about states. The individual person, you and me, we meant almost nothing legally. But following the absolute horrors of global conflict, the Nuremberg trials, and the Geneva Conventions, a profound shift took place. Individuals finally became active, protected subjects. We evolved from a legal system obsessed only with drawing lines on maps to a framework of international humanitarian law that actually defends the physical integrity and dignity of everyday people.
An absolute milestone in this evolution is the 1951 Geneva Convention. This document carved the strict legal rights of refugees into stone. It basically imposed a global ban on turning away anyone who was fleeing their home country due to a justified fear of political, racial, or religious persecution. It is a vital, life-saving shield for human rights. But pay really close attention to this detail. This shield was custom forged for the specific geopolitical crises of the 20th century. Keep that in mind.
Which brings us to our final section, Part 4, Climate Migration, the ultimate modern global challenge.
I want you to look at this number, 7.7 million. The data here is just staggering. In 2023 alone, 7.7 million people were internally displaced by extreme climate disasters across 82 different nations. This completely sweeps away all the pure legal theory we've been talking about and brings us sharply back to empathy and human reality. We are not talking about paragraphs in a dry textbook anymore. We are talking about millions of actual, uprooted lives desperately seeking safety from sheer environmental devastation.
And this right here perfectly illustrates a massive, gaping fracture in the international system. It's a true legal void. Remember that 1951 Geneva Convention we just talked about? Well, it strictly requires a justified fear of persecution. But here's the thing, nature doesn't have a political agenda. A hurricane or a drought isn't intentionally persecuting you. Because of this technicality, the legal status of a climate refugee literally does not exist in international law today. If you flee a dictator, you're protected. But if your island is swallowed by the ocean, global rules simply do not know how to classify you.
Things are slowly starting to shift, though, as the law desperately tries to play catch-up. This brings us to a really landmark legal case, Titiota versus New Zealand. In this case, the UN Human Rights Committee did something unprecedented. For the very first time, they established a direct link between climate change and the fundamental human right to life. They ruled that a country cannot deport a person if the climate of their home country directly threatens their existence. Huge step forward, right? Well, yes, but the catch is that actually proving in a court of law that a climate threat is quote-unquote imminent is still a crazy high legal hurdle to clear.
So what actually happens in practice while we wait for global treaties to update, while states are starting to take shortcuts? Pragmatic, bilateral shortcuts. For example, in November 2023, Australia didn't sit around waiting for a slow UN reform. They struck a groundbreaking agreement directly with Tuvalu, which is an island nation severely threatened by rising sea levels. Australia essentially created a fast-track loophole, granting special visas for Tuvalu citizens to safely relocate, live, work, and study. It's a local, highly agile solution trying to plug the massive holes of a global system that is frankly just too rigid right now.
And that brings us to one final, really provocative thought to wrap up our journey today. Will international law actually be able to adapt to a changing climate? We've seen that our global rules are basically a delicate house of cards built on good faith, created centuries ago to draw borders, and later updated to protect individuals from war. But today, staring down the barrel of an unprecedented climate emergency, will this system manage to evolve fast enough to protect the people who need it the absolute most? Or are these old, rigid structures going to collapse under the weight of an entirely new reality? It is a massive, crucial question for the future of our planet, and I really invite you to think deeply about it. Thanks so much for joining this explainer, and I'll see you next time.